Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really digging into some pretty thought-provoking stuff.
We are. We've got these excerpts from a daily devotion.
Yeah, and it's all centered around Amos chapter 9, verses, 1 through 15?
That's right, 1 to 15.
Mm.
And there's this key verse, verse 11, about restoring David's fallen shelter.
Right, the fallen shelter. For anyone maybe not familiar, that's pointing to, like, a time when King David's kingdom and his family line were in decline, kind of broken down. It's a big symbol in the Old Testament.
Exactly. So our mission, you could say, for the deep dive is to take this ancient text and figure out what it might be saying to us today.
Right here and now.
Yeah. How does this whole message about things falling apart, but then also being rebuilt, how does that connect with, the human experience, stuff we all go through?
Absolutely. And what's really interesting is how the devotion starts with this powerful image, something ruined being brought back.
Like that picture of an old building, totally dilapidated.
Yeah. And then seeing it restored to how it used to be. The devotion uses that as a kind of lens, right, to understand what God does.
In our lives, yeah, or families, or even like bigger communities.
It really sets the stage for looking at both some pretty serious warnings in Amos, but also this incredibly powerful feeling of hope.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's unpack this, starting with that first big theme, this idea of inescapable judgment.
Yeah, the devotional, it doesn't really pull any punches there at the start. It paints this picture from Amos of God's judgment being, absolute everywhere.
It doesn't matter where you try to go.
Right, like hiding deep in the sea or way up on a mountaintop, even if you were sent into exile. The message is pretty stark. You can't hide from God's sight.
Yeah.
He's always present.
Yeah, the source material really hammers that home. God isn't just like watching from afar.
Not a passive observer.
No, it says he's actively involved, paying attention, which, leads to the idea that our choices actually matter. They have consequences.
Nothing's hidden.
Nothing. Now, okay, that sounds maybe a bit heavy, maybe even scary.
It could, yeah.
But the devotion frames it in a really interesting way for us, for the listener. It suggests it's not really about trying to, scare us straight.
That's a really important point, isn't it? The goal isn't fear-based compliance.
Right.
It's more about encouraging us towards genuine integrity.
Yeah.
Living authentically.
Because if you truly believe, nothing's hidden.
Well, it kind of naturally encourages humility, doesn't it? And maybe a deeper respect in how you handle things day to day.
Yeah. And what's interesting is how that ancient idea, God's presence, still resonates with our, very modern search for understanding.
It does. It taps into that desire to know.
Absolutely. And the devotion gets practical, gets down to brass tacks about applying this.
How do we live this out?
Exactly. It says, let honesty, let integrity guide you, both in the big public stuff and, importantly, the small private decisions, too. Which, let's be honest.
That's a high bar.
It really is. And it also brings up something really valuable, spiritual accountability.
Yeah. That's a smart connection. Having mentors, maybe being part of a small group.
Or just trusted friends, right?
Yeah, friends who can offer that support. It ties into that idea of being seen, but in a supportive way, not like being policed.
Right, not police. It's more like a support network while you're navigating life, knowing God's presence is constant anyway.
And that idea of being seen by others, our friends, our community, it kind of mirrors the devotion's point about God's constant presence, doesn't it?
I think it does. And what really struck me was how the devotion emphasizes that this presence isn't just for, church on Sunday.
No, not confined to a specific place or time.
It's with you at work, at home, school, wherever. He's walking alongside you, basically.
Which really changes how you might think about your everyday actions, doesn't it?
It could, yeah. So, okay, we've looked at this inescapable judgment, pretty serious stuff.
Definitely sobering.
But now let's pivot. Let's turn to the second major theme, which is the promised restoration. And this is where things get really interesting.
Yes. That shift in Amos from judgment to this incredible promise of restoration. It's so powerful.
After laying out all the consequences.
Exactly. After outlining what happens when people turn away, the prophecy just flips. It talks about rebuilding David's fallen shelter.
God actively stepping in.
Yeah, to restore, repair, revive what was, completely ruined.
And the devotion makes a crucial point here. It says this isn't just history for ancient Israel.
It connects forward.
Right. It finds its ultimate deeper fulfillment in Jesus, who's, from David's line, bringing spiritual renewal for everyone. That's a huge connection.
It really is. When you plug that into the bigger story of the Bible,
Yeah.
that promise of restoration becomes this central theme. God's relationship with people.
So even if someone's dealing with a very down-to-earth problem, this spiritual connection still offers hope.
I think so. The devotion highlights that God doesn't just abandon us when we're broken.
Even discipline.
Even discipline, which can feel harsh, right?
Right.
It's presented as being for correction, for guidance, not total destruction.
And fundamentally,
Fundamentally, God's desire is always towards reconciliation, rebuilding what got lost.
that is such a key takeaway. Because, I mean, when we hit those fallen shelter moments ourselves,
We all do.
yeah, when things feel like they've just collapsed, it's so easy to think, well, that's it, game over.
Feels final.
But this message is so clear. Turning back, deciding to re-engage. It leads not just to forgiveness, but actual rebuilding, renewal, and eventually, blessings.
It's that strong message of hope, isn't it? Second chances,
Yeah.
even after all those warnings.
It's that aha
Yeah.
moment, you know? Even when things feel shattered, there's a way forward towards restoration.
Like, think about maybe a friendship that felt broken.
Oh, yeah,
This whole idea of rebuilding feels so relevant to those real-life things.
totally. And the practical applications the devotion offers here are really encouraging, very down to earth.
Like what?
Well, it urges us to remember when life gets messy or feels broken, which happens, right? That God is fundamentally a restorer.
So it's about trust.
Yeah, learning to trust his timing, which we all know isn't always our timing.
Isn't that the truth? Trusting the timing.
Right.
That's the hard part sometimes.
Definitely. But then it shifts to the relational side. It encourages us to be active participants.
In our own relationship.
Yeah, to actively seek peace, to offer forgiveness. That's often where the real work is.
It really is. Because often the fallen shelters we experience are those strained relationships.
Good point.
So actively working on healing, on reconciliation there, it really mirrors God's own restorative character.
That makes sense.
And I really like the last practical point the devotion made too.
What was that?
The power of celebrating and sharing our own stories, our personal stories of healing and restoration.
Oh, I love that. Because when we share those stories, right, those times something was broken and then somehow it became whole again.
It makes it real.
Yeah, it gives such real, relatable hope to other people who might be in their own fallen shelter moment right now.
It brings this idea of divine restoration down to earth, makes it feel reachable.
Exactly. So as we kind of start to wrap up this deep dive, let's try and pull together the main threads for everyone listening.
Okay. What really stands out from this source material, I think, is this powerful duality in God's character.
Duality, how so?
Well, he's just right. His assessment, when we turn away, it has real consequences. We saw that clearly.
No escaping judgment.
Right. But equally, and maybe even more profoundly, he is so incredibly gracious. His desire, his active work is always towards restoring what's been broken down.
And the devotion sums that up so well with its little one-word summary.
Which was?
God judges, yet graciously restores. It's that tension, isn't it? That balance between the two that's really the core message.
It really captures it. And the prayer included in the devotion is also worth mentioning.
Yeah, tell us about that.
It's basically a reflection point, a request for God to keep communicating clearly, for us to have hearts ready to follow.
And for our lives.
For our lives, to reflect both truth and justice. Essentially asking for help to live in a way that lines up with both sides of God's character we've talked about, the just side and the gracious side.
That's a really beautiful, grounding prayer. And it kind of leads perfectly into our final thought, something for you, the listener, to chew on.
Okay.
We've talked about fallen shelters in a spiritual way and in relationships, but maybe think a bit broader for a second.
Where else might they show up?
Exactly. Where else in your life might you see a fallen shelter? Maybe it's like a creative project you used to love but you've let slide.
Or a dream you had.
Yeah, a dream you held tight but it's kind of faded. Or maybe even just a part of yourself that feels worn down, a bit broken.
Okay, I see where you're going.
So consider how this principle we've been exploring, divine restoration, this promise of rebuilding, of renewal, how might that offer a new perspective on those areas?
It's not always the huge dramatic failures.
Right. Sometimes it's about the quiet possibilities, bringing new life, new energy to what feels lost or just.
Dormant. That's a really compelling question to just sit with for a while. It pushes us to see that potential for renewal everywhere in life, big and small.
Kind of mirroring that big promise we saw in Amos.
Exactly.
Well, thanks so much for taking this deep dive with us today.
Yeah, great discussion.
Until our next exploration together.